Hey everyone, welcome to this Dear Biden happy hour. I'm just gonna start by saying we've got 67 days to go, and this is a big effort. So thank you for joining and keeping open to learning about what's going on at the local level and how it will impact our race federally. So we're just gonna start with a few minutes to set it up, some introductions, and then we'll dive right into a Q&A. We do have a Slido, and the hashtag is DearBiden. I don't think it's, I think D and the B are capitalized, but I don't think that matters. And so you can add questions to that, and we will be able to ask them during the event here. And then we'll have a little bit of a wrap up and a minute of climate comedy from Liz. So just a bit about ourselves. I am working on a grid planning startup and also a board director of an organization called Student Energy. And I've been working in the clean energy space for about 10 years now. So really excited to be helping out the campaign. Liz, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Liz Finnegan. I know some of you, but not all, so welcome. I'm originally from Washington, D.C. I grew up across the street from the National Zoo, and they brainwashed me real early, and so I'm a big fan of the environment and have made my career in clean energy, and I came to PG&E in order to work on that. And so I've been in California for a couple of years, and I think probably growing up in D.C., I also had a bit more of a political sensibility, and so working on making sure we get folks elected that really care about the climate and care about our world and our environment, our place in it is really important to me. So I'm glad to see all you guys, fellow energy enthusiasts, here as well.
All right, so what are these Dear Biden happy hours? Why are we hosting them? So this is our third. We happen to skip over one. We'll try to get back to that one at some point. But really the purpose and the impetus of these happy hours are to make Joe Biden's climate plan a little more accessible. If you go to the website, the policies can sometimes be in, I would say, like policy speak. And so we want to try to broaden that audience of these policies and their potential impact by breaking it down through conversation. And one of the big things about this is that we can only do this with your engagement. So we want to make sure that we have your engagement with the topics and the speakers that we're putting together. And so we've put together a 2-minute pre-event survey. The link is in the chat. So if you'd like to fill that out, that we'd be very grateful. And again, we do have a Slido running, so please continue to add your questions there. So another note, what is CE4B? So this event is produced by us, and we're a part of a larger network called Clean Energy for Biden. We're actually, I think, 4,000 or 5,000 members strong at this point.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, so, and we keep growing, and really the purpose of the network is to unite the clean energy community, especially now that as an industry, we both have a lot of political power, but also community power, and to take all this grassroots efforts that are being done at the state level to help mobilize our workforce and to shape policy, raise funds, and get out the vote. And so we've had a bunch of events over the past few months, and we're really shifting to getting out the vote. And so we ask anyone who wants to get involved to kind of relay that message and start engaging folks, because while the election is on November 7th, there are some deadlines before that, like registration and making sure you're getting your mail-in ballot that are happening much sooner than that. So keep those in mind, and we have a bunch of information on that in the community. So how can you help? I just mentioned that. I'm sure most of you here are registered to vote, but there are a lot of folks that aren't, and so there's a number of GOTV efforts to try to get the vote out and make sure folks who may not have registered or may, have been disenfranchised, to get them back into the fray. And then you can take action by going to the Clean Energy for Biden website and donate if you can. So Caroline has been working on a bunch of local elections, and so we don't want to just have all the money flow to Biden, but also the down ballot candidates that are going to impact the rest of the election. I just want to note before I introduce today's topic, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world with Hurricane Laura, the recent shooting of Jacob Blake. And the reason I wanted to note that is because these are convergence of a lot of issues related to climate and racial justice that are happening at the forefront here. And it just relays the importance of the topics that we're trying to address and we're trying to bring to the forefront. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's topic. The question is, how do local and state elections impact national climate policy and Joe Biden's climate plan more specifically? So to talk about this, this is just a little information about Biden's plan, but to talk about this, we have our expert, Caroline Spears, who is the founder of Climate Cabinet and has built, tested, and deployed our material for the past 3 years. Before Climate Cabinet, she worked in solar project finance, analyzing gigawatt hours of solar in 8 different markets that represent over $7 billion in solar investment. And she graduated with a BS and MS in atmosphere and in energy engineering from Stanford. So with that, I'll pass it over to Liz.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Get excited. Caroline is awesome and is doing some super cool work. And so we're going to get a chance to learn a little bit from Caroline a bit about, why down ballot elections count, why local and state elections count, and how sometimes us getting involved in those can be even more impactful than getting involved in elections like Joe Biden's, where our voice is one amongst many, or our dollars are one amongst many. And so I want to introduce Caroline, my co-fellow from CELI and the leader of the Climate Cabinet Action Fund. Welcome, Caroline. Woo!
Thanks for having me.
I think everyone else is also clapping. You just can't hear them because they're on mute. But welcome. So I think we can get things started. I think maybe we can kick things off a bit by learning a little bit more about you. So I know we just heard a little bit of your bio, but maybe you can tell us a bit more about yourself. I mean, how did you get involved in climate and clean energy? What initially got you into the space?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that intro. Climate Cabinet started when I'm from Houston, Texas. So speaking of hurricanes and everything that's going on right now, I have been evacuated from hurricanes 5 times in my life. So that's a 5-time hurricane evacuee. And especially with everything that's going on right now, that's definitely top of mind. Yeah. All of Climate Cabinet started in early 2018. I'm from Houston. I was working in solar finance and hanging out in that area. And the candidate for state senate reached out and said, "Hey, can you help write a climate platform?" Mm-hmm. And it's like, sure. Like this wasn't just any like state senate seat. This was the break the Republican supermajority in Texas, state senate seat of the year. And I was like, sure, but doesn't anyone else do this? Why are you asking me? I did get a degree in climate science, but it was sure, yeah, I'm happy to. But I saw that when anyone ran for office, almost at every level, folks kind of stepped in and were like, hey, here's where you need to be on climate. Here's where you need to be on guns. Here's where all the interest groups are. And it turns out that infrastructure does not exist for candidates on climate change. So that's how Climate Cabinet got started. I sat down, wrote her a climate brief. Then I sat down with a few other folks and we wrote 100 district-specific briefs for every single Democrat running for state legislature in Texas, flew to the Fort Worth convention and handed them out and literally walked through the halls of the convention center. And instead of those people who were handing out papers about chemtrails, we were the people handing out papers around smart climate policy specific to your district. So that's how this all started. Yeah, and I did this as a volunteer for a year. Texas state legislature, Virginia House of Delegates, and then started volunteering for some presidential campaigns. And that's when I realized, if I'm being this helpful for presidential campaigns, this is a infrastructure gap that needs to be filled, is kind of helping candidates and policymakers, creating a shadow cabinet for the climate community, like in the same idea that the UK government has that shadow cabinet. We support them creating climate platforms that make sense for their community.
That's so interesting, because I imagine that must be a lot of work to kind of get to the district specific level and say, because I imagine you're able to make the case like, hey, climate change is impacting the people you want to represent. Here's how. Here are some things that you can do that will be important. I mean, what is the process for doing all that?
Yeah. So initially we wrote the first 100 district specific briefs by hand. And what we did is talk to candidates, and a few candidates were like, what do you want? Like, what's helpful for you? And then we wrote it for 100 by hand, which I will never do again, because since then, they were like, this is horrible. Let's create a database. Because like candidates want to know like 5 things. They're like, jobs in my district, polling in my district, asthma and healthcare in my district. How does climate change interact with all the clean jobs, asthma rates, sea level rise, and how has my opponent voted on every major piece of climate legislation or environmental? We just digitized it, and we now, for every state, we'll write a different paper because states are different.
Yeah.
But in terms of district specific information, we now have a database that does a lot of that automatically, which is really nice and saves a lot of time. Yes. And what we found is like candidates want stuff that's relevant to their district and will help them win, because they're up for election every 2 to 6 years. And so through the first 2 years of this being kind of a volunteer situation, we talked to a ton of candidates and figured out like, what are the top things that you know about? And we went and found the databases for it, and we had it in a nice little PDF that's relevant for them. Candidates spend an average of 7 hours a day dialing for dollars. They are fundraising all of the time. They do not have time. And you're a state ledge candidate. You're in charge of energy efficiency. You're in charge of the grid of your state, the Public Utilities Commission, disaster funding, local zoning. You're in charge of a lot of things that are they're critically important for us actually solving the climate issue. But you don't have, if you're running for those seats, there's you, maybe 1, maybe 2 staffers, super underfunded, high ROI when it comes to climate change, and like, how do we support these candidates? Because they have such a massive impact on our ability to solve climate change, and they have like 1 staffer.
Yeah, so for those of us who are on this to learn a little bit more about Biden's plan and a little bit about climate policy, I think it's worthwhile highlighting that the first ever paid climate change policy staffer was hired by Elizabeth Warren this past election cycle, like basically in the last year. And that was the first time anyone had been paid to care about climate change and policy, even though we all know that we care about this so much and it's such an important topic and it moves people. And so I think it's just reinforcing what you say. And I think also for many of us, I think know quite a bit about energy and love it very much. But I think for some people who are newer to energy, they may not know that as much as we'd love for Biden to come in and fix all of our problems, a lot of things are handled at the state level. I think you referred to that just now when you're talking about utility policy, about zoning. Can you explain why that's so important? Because I think this goes to the heart of why we should care about local and state elections. Like, why do we care about those things?
Yeah, when I think about climate change policy, I have in my mind the drawdown list of, if you're familiar with Project Drawdown, that beautiful list of sectors of the economy we need to decarbonize.
What is Project Drawdown?
It's this website. It's a whole group of folks who kind of analyze the most of the sectors that emit the most carbon and specific action items. It's really actionable, this beautiful actionable list of ways to decarbonize. What's missing from that is, how does that interact with the federal? What do we need the federal government to do? What do we need to do? What do we need the county commissioners, Board of Education, no matter what office anybody's running from, there's something you can do on climate change that your particular office is uniquely suited to do. And so that's how we think about climate change. Climate change is climate impact multiplied by like their jurisdictional authority. What are they legally allowed to do? And we, when working with state legislatures, and we've also done some work with the federal level as well, we say, okay, what can the feds do? What are the feds uniquely suited for? And what are the state legislatures uniquely suited for? And for state leg, it's a lot like they control the Public Utilities Commission. So they control the commission that decides how much clean power gets on the grid. We saw Virginia have 100% clean energy last year. That's why people keep pushing Arizona to be better. Arizona, we are 2 seats away from having a Democratic majority in the Arizona legislature.
I thought that they were a little bit more conservative than that. That sounds like no. Caroline, you still there?
Yeah. We cut off for a second, but such is
the life of 2020, right?
And so when we're thinking about the state legislature and what types of bills are up, I mean, okay, here's a tale of two states. We're going to talk about Colorado, and let's talk about Arizona. What did we see last year in Colorado? Finally, the Democrats flipped all three. We got a trifecta in the Colorado state government. We have the Democrats have the House, Democrats have the Senate, they have the governor. They passed 8 climate bills last session. They're like 100% clean energy goal. They passed a carbon plan, electric vehicles. We're going to redo how our public utilities are compensated to like help promote renewables and EVs and all of these things. And then compare Arizona, a state not super different from Colorado in its same general area, kind of the same topography, worse climate impacts, better solar resource. Arizona passed no bills on a climate plan last session.
None.
They had, if you go look at the Sierra Club scorecard for Arizona, it's like, there was this, it's all like all the bills that were passed that have any nexus to climate or environment were like, prevent the Department of the Environment from rolling back key environmental protections. So you have 2 types of states in America. You have like, let's tackle this, it's proactive. We're gonna pass 10 plans for how we solve climate change. And then we have Arizona and Florida and Iowa and Texas and North Carolina. And they're just, all of the environmental bills, the climate bills that are up are very, they're like, I think there was a bill in Florida to study electric vehicles. And that's as close to climate action as they got. And it's like, man, y'all could be setting 100% targets. It's the sunshine state. Like, this is so perfect for solar, and instead EV studies. So that's why we're focused on state legislatures, because we see the goal in terms of Colorado, in terms of what New York and California are doing. And we see where we are with many state legislatures, which is not any.
Not as good.
Yeah, there's no plan.
Okay, so I think that actually takes us to our first listener question from Kevin.
Yeah.
And Kevin was asking, which state and local elections are you tracking? Because it does seem like strategically, there is a difference for where we should be focusing on, right?
Right.
And not only which states and local elections are you looking at, but why? Like, what is it about them that makes them special?
Yeah, so this year we're looking at, and we're going to have a public release on this in 2 weeks. So go sign up for our newsletter on our website. And
we're going to put that
more information
in the chat. You can sign up for her newsletter.
Yeah, more information this soon. But here's what we're looking at in terms of state legislatures. We have taken and digitized every single climate environmental vote from every state legislator in 10 states. And these are the 10 states where we can actually flip control the state leg this year. Super important for gerrymandering. We took those 10 states and we said, we digitized how everyone in those 10 states voted on every major piece of environmental legislation, picked out the climate bills. We're like, okay, well, really focusing on the climate bills. Who are, like, what are patterns between the states, and where are there strange occurrences? Like, what's going on in these states? That's 1,400 state legislators, to give y'all some idea of scale. So the best.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Did you say 1,400?
Yeah,
state
so
legislature?
14 in 10 states, which is crazy. There's 7,383 state legislators in America, which is why sometimes climate policy tends to focus on federal because there's like 500 seats that we have to worry about. And state
Yeah.
leg gets hard with the numbers, and that's why we're kind of a database-enabled shop because we can handle the numbers. Yeah, and so you take 1,400 state legislators, you take how they've all voted, and looking through this data set, really interesting trends emerge. You see, you might think, or I thought before we analyzed this, that, oh, if they're vulnerable, they will be likely to, maybe if you're a vulnerable Republican in a suburban district, you're going to vote a little bit more moderate. Not the case. We have a ton of Republicans in districts that Clinton won by like 12 points, and they have like 0% scores. Like literally in their whole career, they have taken 0 votes when it comes to zero positive votes when it comes to climate change. And you're like, why are these people still in office? So you start getting trends of like, wait, there are some races that have a much bigger climate impact than others and a much bigger like ROI basically.
Yeah.
Actually, one thing that is public is we released a letter with Beto O'Rourke in Texas that did this analysis just for Texas and said, all right, who are the clowns in the Texas State House that like need, like, they just need to like find other, like, look, if you're in Texas, you're getting battered by 2 hurricanes and 250,000 people are employed by the clean energy economy in Texas.
Yeah.
What do you do if you're not going to show that? Like, what's the point of, how are you representing your state? How are you representing your constituents? So we found the top 10 Texas State House, and I just dropped a link in the chat. You can read about them there. And this is one project that we do. This is the Climate Cabinet Action Fund. There's a really, so in terms of like thinking about the top races that we're focused on, we'll go in and do these analyses in different states and really pinpoint, okay, if you're talking ROI, like, yeah, you can give, everyone should support Joe Biden for president, first of all, but also working on these down ballot candidates does support Joe Biden for president, which is exciting, like thinking about Texas as a state or North Carolina or all of these swing states.
They say that Texas is in play for the first time in a long time.
Which as someone who grew up in Texas is hard for me to emotionally believe, but the numbers don't lie, so that's true. In terms of, so it does help Joe Biden to support some of these candidates, and like a Texas House race, and like, Joe Biden, you give $20 to Joe Biden, he's going to raise $1.5 billion this cycle of just inside spending. If you take outside groups too, it's probably $3 billion. $6 billion total for the entire presidential cycle was what we spent in 2016, and we're probably going to surpass that this year. Take a state houses in Texas, 150,000, 200,000. In terms of ROI on your effort, in terms of volunteers or donations versus impact, it's a lot higher, especially, y'all, when you read about some of these vote records, it's when you go through the records, it's shocking how extreme people are relative to their political vulnerability. It's like, you won this seat by 300 votes and you're voting against me? It employs like 22,000 Texans. Like, what are you doing? So this was the shock that led to the creation of this top 10 list. Okay,
so I think we've actually gotten through like a lot of meat here, which is, and I don't know about everyone listening right now, but at least for me, the fact that you can win a state legislature race with like 100K blows my mind. So that's actually really impressive, because that means that any one of us can donate even a small amount of money and it'll have just a much larger relative impact on some of those races. And it sounds like those are really gettable districts, because a lot of these places that you're focusing on are places that were won by very small margins. And so you also mentioned that you're focusing on 10 states, and that within one of those states, Texas, you're focusing on 10 races. Can you maybe tell us what those 10 states are and kind of why you picked those? And then if you have some time, maybe you can go into why those specific races in Texas matter so much.
Yeah, so 10 states. In 2 weeks, we're going to come out with something called the Climate Cabinet 40, which are the 40 impactful state legislature races on climate this cycle. And because they're state legislature races, they have this ROI element to them where your dollar will go so much farther. So look for that. We don't take any money from this. Like, we just put up portals and then all of the money goes directly to the candidates, because we need some more pro-climate people on November 4th. And so that's
Seriously.
our entire goal there. Yeah. So in terms of those 10 states, there's the 10 states that are, that most other groups are focused on this year. So for any obsessive politics watchers out there, you will not be surprised by this list. It is Colorado, Texas, Arizona. These are ones with like competitive Senate, they're competitive president, they're competitive in terms of flipping the state legislature. And so we kind of cut for those three things so that every investment in terms of volunteer hours, et cetera, every investment into those states has multiplying impacts. Okay, we got Georgia, we got Florida, North Carolina, I'm gonna see if I can get this by memory, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa.
All right.
Thanks, Wade.
Done and dusted, guys.
So it's these 10 states, and we picked them because of that impact. And then within them, we went in and said, what's the state of the landscape in terms of climate action in this state? And who can we pick out who are the absolute best on climate, who are super vulnerable and we have to keep them in office, and who are the absolute worst on climate, that it's like, go find another job. Just like, this isn't, like, if you're not going to tackle this biggest existential crisis of our time, you can do something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really interesting that you also pulled out some of those people who are already in the state legislature that are really good on climate, that we don't want them to lose their seat. And I think sometimes it's always about flipping the seat, but it's always, at least from what I've heard when I used to live in DC, it's always easier to hold on to a seat than to try and flip one. And if we have good people working on climate, I mean, those people sometimes don't get enough attention, for sure.
Yeah, and so we're trying to highlight, and I also want to acknowledge, like, we're talking really politically here. The reason we're talking politically is because there are 500 fires burning in the state of California, and we have multiple hurricanes hitting the Gulf of Mexico, and the Greenland ice sheet, as we found out last week, is probably uncontrollably melting, and that's 25 feet of sea level rise. That's a third of Florida. So, like, that's why we're talking about this in such political terms. I want to differentiate this. Sometimes it gets so easy to get into like gamification of politics and like, oh, we're going to get this seat. This state legislature seat has a triplicate effect with the Senate and the presidency. And it's easy to get in that mindset that the only reason I'm talking about, okay, we're going to win on November 3rd, we're going to flip these seats to the 10 worst in the Texas state legislature, is because of that broader goal of like, this is what we need to do to solve climate change. And so many businesses out there want to get started, but can't get started because the policy landscape just isn't. And so this is a precondition to us kind of unleashing a clean energy economy, just like we did in the America and the stimulus from the Great Recession. We did a really great job there, creating 3 million clean energy jobs throughout the United States from that stimulus money. We need to do that again, and we don't have time. And that's why I'm being so political. And it is broadly the case. We've analyzed the data, right? Like, we know how they voted on all of the climate legislation. It's really broken down on party lines, and it doesn't matter how vulnerable these states are. And that's unfortunate. I wish politicians felt more accountable to their voters and what their voters cared about. And so I want the future where that's not the case, and I want the future where this is bipartisan. And the reason that you'll see, we have one Republican on our top 20 best in America list coming out in 2 weeks, which I'm very excited about. Darryl Green from Georgia, send him some love. He has 100% climate voting score last session. Fabulous.
Damn, 100%.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Get behind them.
Yeah, but he's the only one, and we did analyze 1,400 state legislators. So but just to give a little bit of context on why I'm talking about things so politically, I am, but we got to this from analyzing how they voted from a climate perspective.
So I'd love to get into like a couple listener questions, if that's okay with you. We have a question from Sam Horowitz about, well, are there any key sets of principles or policies that you keep consistent across all of your plans, regardless of whether it's deep blue or deep red?
In terms of, there's some key, well, okay, one kind of key principle would be, okay, how do you pick which climate bills? And so we have a few key principles that we use. Anything that talks about reducing climate change or greenhouse gases, top of the list, easy, throw that in there. Promoting renewable energy, like that's done. That's easy. We'll include bills around environmental enforcement and increasing versus decreasing pollution.
Okay.
And we'll also include every bill that talks about environmental justice, because as we're seeing with Hurricane Laura, and as we've seen with a lot of these natural disasters, the communities that get hit the hardest are frontline communities, low-income communities, and communities of color. And so every bill that deals with environmental justice, it's a climate bill in our camp. So those are some three kind of large principles that we have. Just to give like one specific example on why environmental justice makes it into our calculation, and why state legislatures are important. Natural disaster relief money happens. FEMA, like Trump's taken money out of FEMA to pay for the border wall, but setting that aside, like FEMA has the federal money, they give it to the states, and the states get to decide where, who gets the money in their state. Like the feds don't decide that, they just block the states and the states decide. So if the states set up a system that's prioritizing wealthy communities will get all of that disaster relief money, even if they didn't face the most impact. So very specific example, after Hurricane Harvey, which literally occurred, if you want to get some like crazy hurricane stats, 15 years ago this week, Hurricane Katrina hit. 3 years ago, Hurricane Harvey hit. So we're seeing these, I mean, it's such a pattern. So in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey, the state agency who got the federal money allocated per affected resident of Taylor Landing, a predominantly white community, the state agency allocated $60,000 per affected resident. Per affected resident of Port Arthur, a nearby minority-majority community, the state agency allocated $84 per affected resident. So you see clearly how like some of these systemic inequities filter in to our ability to respond to climate change. $60,000 per affected resident in one community, $84 per affected resident in another community, which is wild. So that's what we include it, because of information like that is why we include some of that in our principles.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who are voting for Biden anyway, I mean, I think there's a lot of us who care quite a bit about not just environmental justice, but equity across the board. And
yeah,
I think it's great that this is an issue that you're able to address. And, you know, what they always say is that if you don't proactively address it, it will just continue to remain inequitable and to be systematically disenfranchising others. So I'm just really glad that you have that ability to build that into your plans and to kind of make the world a little bit of a better place all the time.
The goal with a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah,
Hello, everyone. Yeah.
So we have a question from Juliet, and she says, how is Climate Cabinet's excellent work funded?
Thanks, Juliet. So there's the Climate Cabinet. I have to differentiate between two different, I'm sorry, I'm going to try to not be too legal. The Climate Cabinet Action Fund, which does all of our work being like, hey, here's the 10 races you should target, does all of our outward-facing candidate communications, helping candidates develop platforms that make sense for their community. And that's the Action Fund. And then we have, Climate Cabinet LLC is a company. And the way I would describe that is like a climate consulting company, and that has all the data, and we can use that data in a variety of ways. So if you want to know who's funding the Action Fund, you can check the FEC filings. We have to be super public about everything. So it's on the FEC. You can literally see everyone. It's like small dollar donors. So that's that. And then the LLC is our consulting business that has all of the data in it, and we sign contracts with a variety of different groups to do a variety of different things, different mapping projects. We're working on a few projects around, different mapping projects, research projects, etc.
All right, so there have been a couple of you who have asked, is there a fantastic climate cabinet list where their $5 can go very effectively, especially if they live in California and need a good place to put those dollars?
Yeah. So for now, we have this Texas top 10, which is the Texas races. Y'all, we can flip the Texas House this year, and that like weirds me out to say, because I'm like, really? In my mind, I'm like, so look, Beto flipped, on Beto's coattails, we flipped 9 Texas State House races in 2018. There are 22 that like are stretch goals. Let's call them stretch goals. There are 22 Texas House races that are kind of the state parties, like maybe we can flip these. We need to flip 9 more in order to flip the Texas House. And so right now, the Democrats are polling ahead of the Republican in 18 of those districts, which is pretty shocking. We expect the race to tighten as we get into October. So yeah, we expect the race to get, I don't expect 18 House races to flip, but we need 9. So if we have it's like the numbers are there. This is the problem in Texas right now, is that Biden's polling super well in these 22 districts, and the state House races are falling behind because there's not that name ID. So the question that a lot of those House races are thinking about is, how do we get our name ID up so that we can like start matching where Biden's polling in just my district, and then they can kind of flip it. But we need people to vote all the way down the ballot, and that's another reason why these state ledge races, investing in them will help Biden, but they'll also help kind of get these coattails. There's coattails existing, but in order to make that really a powerful way to flip, so investing in them is a little bit helpful.
Awesome. And I think that leads me to a question that a lot of us have. There are a couple more questions here, and we'll get to them in a second, but I think one question I had, and I think some people do have, is like, you know, what can we do? You know, say we live in California, or, you know, some of my colleagues from DC are here. I mean, DC has literally voted 96% Democratic in the last election. So, you know, donating is great, and I think that's really important. But like, for those of us who are a little younger, who may be out of a job during COVID, who are like just out of school, or maybe who are being students, or like, what if you're like an international person and like this really matters to you, and like the leadership in America, the leadership even at a state level does make a difference. Like, what are some things that those people can do, people who otherwise don't really have as much say in elections?
Yeah, so this is really exciting. Obviously, like every event ever is like, donate to this thing. And so I want to talk about a little bit about how Climate Cabinet got started.
Yes, please.
That are maybe more intellectually interesting than clicking a donate button, which is obviously really helpful, especially with 7 days till the election. Like, no one's in like, what's my climate platform mode now. They're all like, oh my gosh, we need to get our name out there.
Yeah.
So at this volunteering, I would put that up. If the Texas 10, if you want to volunteer for any of them, they have phone banks all the time, text banks all the time. There's postcard writing, any method. I wouldn't suggest these if I hadn't read a bunch of papers showing that phone banking works.
I don't mean to be so surprised by that.
I know. Having done a lot of phone banking myself, I too am surprised. But they've done a lot of science on this and done a bunch of controlled experiments. And
well, you heard it here first, guys. It works. So sign up for it, but sign up for the local legislatures. I don't mean to interrupt your role, and we can come back to what we can do, but specifically on phone banking, specifically on letter writing, when we're talking about races in like swing states, and we live in California or in DC or in Chicago or something like that, how do we get over that anxiety that like people aren't going to listen to us because we're not from that state?
Yeah, I think.
Or will people listen to us?
I think that's fair. Yeah, I mean, what I always say, like when I get into a tough phone banking conversation or door knocking, not that anyone's doing door knocking this year, but that's why everyone's phone banking. I get into that tough conversation. It's like, what do you care about? What brings you there? And it's like, I really care that everybody has healthcare.
Yeah.
And that I really care that I'm tired of seeing all the hurricanes hit Houston. I live in California and I have wildfires every day, and I really need to, I'm tired of I have an air purifier in the back. Like, I shouldn't have to buy an air purifier to live somewhere. Yeah, I mean, that is usually my go-to line, is like, I'm here because I care about our democracy, and I know I live from a different state, but I care so much about this. I don't know. Yeah.
And people respond to that well?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes not, obviously. Sometimes they're like, if you call me one more time, it's like, I'm sorry, we're just gonna call you through November and then we'll stop. Like, I promise, but I wouldn't be doing this. No one's paying me to do this. I wouldn't be doing this if it weren't important.
Yeah, I mean, I think there have been some times where I've phone banked in other places, and I think the fact that their decision has an impact on your life can sometimes make all the difference. And especially if you're speaking genuinely and saying, you know, this is something I care about, and you don't have to like browbeat them or anything like that, but just let them know the consequences of their vote are significant, or if they don't vote, that the consequences extend beyond their own lives sometimes can fall, I think. So, anyway, I'm sorry. Please, if you will, return to your list of all the cool things you can do without money.
Yeah, there's currently an open job for, I'm not public with our top 40 list yet, but there's an open job at someone who will make our top 40 list with Aaron Zwiener in Texas. So we have action items for any way you're interested. If you're looking for a job right now, go look up Aaron Zwiener in the state of Texas. She's trying to hire someone. She's made, she barely won her race in 2018, and that's 100% climate voting record. So I will type her name there. And she posted the job application on Twitter, which was interesting. But if you look up her Twitter handle, I might be able to find it, the actual link real quick. She's hiring people right now. That's a way to help someone. And then the last thing I'd say is, what really surprised me in all of this was, like, I had a background in climate change and clean energy. A lot of y'all do, some of y'all do more than others, whatever. Talking to people running for office, especially early on when they're trying to run, helping them develop their policy platform is something they need help with. And you can use your expertise to help them. I mean, and sometimes early in a campaign, they need someone to like help set up their website. They need someone to sometimes do the little things, but like, it's cool that I've been able to talk to all these candidates and help them write their climate platforms. That's awesome. Like, I never wrote someone's policy platform before, you know? I was just like, hey, I'm here to help. Tell me about your race. Okay, you need to get this. You think your pathway to victory is through, you're a veteran and that's really important to you. I'm gonna go find information about how the is tackling, and that can be part of your platform. Like, going to people running for attorney general or DA for a local city. Chesa Bowden, who ran it in San Francisco, was like, wow, I wish do you have any information when he was running? Like, do you have any information? And that was how we tackle pollution. And I was like, no, like, I literally don't, and I don't know, and I don't have time to get that information for you, and I'm sorry.
We had a question from Stephen Rothstein about like insurance and banking commissioners. And it's like not the sexiest title of all time, but it sounds like it really has a pretty critical role in climate policy.
Yeah, and like, how do you help them achieve the goals that they want to achieve by running, and help them with the climate policy platform? If you're running for school board, how do you electrify all the school buses? How do you push for that as a goal? Diesel is so harmful to health at bus stops. So though, like, I can give you really specific things, which is like Texas Top 10, donate to them, go volunteer for them, go apply to work for Aaron Zwiener's campaign in Texas. But broadly, I think there's a huge opportunity for folks to get involved. And I know that not just from my own experience, but also from, like, sometimes I'll be I get put in touch with the most random people who are like, oh, well, you know, that one guy in Atlanta, he kind of like writes all of Atlanta's sustainability policy. What? And there's like one guy who just like he's a huge, started out as an EV expert, expanded his expertise to ERCOT, and now people running for city council are like, oh yeah, go talk to Joe, he knows a lot about this. And it's shocking how informal a lot of these conversations are. In California, there's a big infrastructure setup. It just depends on where you are. But people running for precinct chairs, for precinct, you know, there's
Yeah.
a wide variety of different, and who need help figuring out that same big question of how do you take the drawdown list, how do you take the list of decarbonization options, how do you match that on to the specific specific thing that they are running for in that election.
Right.
And so, look, we're at the end of the election cycle. Everyone's like, volunteer, fundraise, donate, like phone bank for everyone. That's what everyone's focused on right now. In December is when people file to run for the Virginia House of Delegates next year. So like, and that's the Virginia State House. So, and that's when people are filing to run for all your municipal elections, wherever you are, whichever city. So that's an opportunity. If you want to get in touch with anyone who's filed to run and say, hi, let me help you write your climate platform. Maybe not everyone would be excited, but most people will be like, oh, free help to do something I literally don't have time to do. That's awesome.
So, I mean, if you guys take away anything from this, it's that you don't necessarily, I mean, your money can go much farther with some specific state legislatures, and legislator candidates, but also that, you know, if you have some knowledge about climate policy, you don't have to necessarily be Joe Biden's climate policy advisor in order to have a big impact. And so, like, all that it takes is a little bit of proactive work, and maybe you can use Caroline's like top 40 candidates, or, you know, just keep following Climate Cabinet, and as like new elections come along, you can see, you know, who's vulnerable and who's not, and you can donate your time and say, hey, I'm not really the kind of person who likes to phone bank. I'm not really the kind of person who likes to phone bank. But I love clean energy and I love policy, and I maybe don't know as much as some others, but I know enough to be effective. And if I can go to some of these folks, even places that I don't know, and say, I'm willing to do the work, to do the research, I can use some of the Climate Cabinet research to craft a really smart climate policy, that can really help raise the profile of climate change in these elections, and that's really important. So I have a couple more questions for you, and then we have to wrap up in a few minutes, unfortunately. I feel like I've talked to you for a really long time. However, really fast.
Liz, can I ask a question?
Oh, how dare you, Mihir? Go ahead.
Caroline, so just connecting your work to what's happening at the federal level. So this year is a census year, and I think that has like a lot of meaning with how future lines of congressional districts are going to be drawn. Can you kind of connect the dots of the work that you're doing at the local level, climate policy nationally, and what this election in particular means?
Yeah, so 2020 is a fun census year. So that means that the most state legislators in America get to draw their own district boundaries, and they get to draw the boundaries not only of their state legislative races, they also get to draw the boundaries of the congressional races. So if you flip a state legislature seat, if we flip the Texas Senate or the North Carolina House, the Texas House of the North Carolina Senate or the Arizona Senate, for example, we'll have a balance of power, which means that the parties will have to both decide how the congressional districts are drawn instead of just one party deciding. And you've all seen the maps of how horribly gerrymandered some of these districts are. And if we want a world in which voters choose their politicians and not the other way around, that's why the state leg has such a clear impact with the US House. It's a great kind of correlation. There are a few states that have independent commissions. California has an independent commission. They don't let politicians draw the boundaries for their own districts, but most other states are not that way.
Fantastic. All right, so I have two more questions for you. And then you guys are gonna have to sit through a minute of climate comedy, so gird your loins, folks. All right, so can you tell us a little bit about what it's been like to be an entrepreneur? I don't want to emphasize your age too much because your age isn't necessarily representative of your capabilities or anything like that, but you are young. You're 26. And
Yeah.
you've been able to have this big impact in climate. And I think a lot of young people are frustrated by the fact that there's a lot of folks who are a little bit older who are in charge of everything. Can you talk a little bit about your journey to entrepreneurship and what it took to start Climate Cabinet And I know this is a longer conversation, but can you talk a little bit about the major hurdles that you faced and how you were able to do this really important thing?
Yeah, I would compare a little bit. I would compare like my age to starting Climate Cabinet a bit to people who do modern art, in that you kind of go to the modern, sometimes you go to like the MoMA and you're like, why is there, it's a white canvas. Like, why am I here? I paid admission to see like a white, like, I don't, what am I here for? And it's like, yeah, but they were the first person to do it. Like they were there and they did it first. And so therefore, and so that's really how I feel cabinet is that I like, look, there are people with 20 more years of experience in climate policy than me, but I found a niche and I just did it. And I was like, you know what? If I were to accept applications for who should be talking to 100 candidates this cycle about what their climate policy should be, you know, I would pick someone with 20 years more experience, probably, and like messaging experience and has worked on the Hill and does all these stuff. But I just did it because nobody else was, and it was important. And like, look, I like went through and I was like, okay, well, what do I know about messaging? I don't know, some, like I can guess, but I was like, okay, like I will go read every single polling paper that's been done on what messaging works best in which communities on climate. And so we have a one-pager on persuadable voters. We have a one-pager on young voters, like what works best in messaging and all of these different districts, incorporate all of that. I just was like, hey, candidates, what do you need from me? And I will go find that for you. And I will like combine that and I will give you whatever you need to be good on this issue, because you have to be good on this issue and that we can't, like whatever, 10 years, we can't wait. So yeah, so that was that. And then to start, I mean, I went to every climate event. I knew that candidates needed education on climate change. And I knew that because of this like weird thing in Houston where this just happened to happen. And I just talked to a bunch of candidates and was like, oh, wait, you don't have the information. That's strange. And then I got too stressed that too many candidates, once I started working the presidential level, I was like, oh my God, I need to like, I quit my job. I was like, why does nobody have this? So I just went to every climate event in the greater San Francisco Bay Area for a year and like met people. And that's how all of this started. Was I just showed up to a ton of events and like talked with everyone about the topic and refined it and figured it out. So
you do make it sound like something you just like did, and I have to really respect that, because I think a lot of people think about these kinds of things and then don't do them. You know, they're just like, well, maybe someone else will do it, maybe, but you did it. It's really amazing.
Yeah, it's been wild. It has happened. It's been fun, but like, yeah. And there are like 8 million other things that are very similar where there are people running for county commissioner and they really need help. And I just took the state legislature thing and I ran with it, but talk to your local person running, figure out all the people running. When they file, you can get a list of everyone running for every seat and be like, find your favorite person and be like, how do I help? Like, it's a process that can be replicated anywhere you live at every level of government. It's specifically the smaller levels of government that really need more help.
All right, so I totally messed up and I like pasted the wrong thing in the chat, but if you want to follow Caroline, I don't know what other things besides Twitter, but her Twitter is C_R_Spears and @climate_AF, which is an amazing Twitter handle. So definitely follow her, encourage other people to follow her, people who, like a lot of us, are maybe in California and like deep blue states who are looking for a way to help. Like, Caroline is someone that you can listen to and will help you know where you can kind of make some of those investments and make them positively with the most impact. And so kind of last but not least, I guess, like maybe give you the floor for like one last minute. What are some of the things that the people who are here or who view this later can do to get involved with you? Like, how can they support your mission? How can they be a part of it?
Yeah, well, we have our newsletter, which is, I just posted our website. And so we email that, I won't say regularly, we email that newsletter. Look, if any of you donated to anyone running for president this past cycle, Cory Booker sent me 25 emails a day. I'm gonna say we're at the other extreme where we probably don't email people enough. We email people like every 5 weeks. So I promise if you sign up for the newsletter, we're not gonna spam you. And you will get a nice overview of what's happening. Yeah. So that's probably the best way, on Twitter. Yeah, that's probably, and
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, Caroline, thank you so much for joining us. I feel like I learned like a billion new things, and I'm like, I feel so empowered. I'm like really ready. But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your amazing work. And I hope the people who are here now are feeling like they have a really good way that they can move forward and really have an impact on the election in a way that's not just like one amongst a million, but you can really have an impact. And with that being said, I think we're gonna kind of wrap things up, but you have to stay and wait until the end to listen to my climate comedy, which might be a reason why you might log off right now, but just hold on 1 second, because I gotta thank some people and I gotta remind you of some really cool stuff. I think we are gonna go ahead and put Caroline's information again in the chat, and my buddy Mihir, who co-hosts this with me, is gonna help me put that in there. Please follow her on Twitter. Please sign up for her newsletter. Please do what you can for that Texas 10. I mean, like, we all know that climate change is not an issue that affects whoever is voting for that person in that state. It spans the globe. And so as much as possible, let's help make Caroline's mission a success here. And in the future, if you care about this and want to do something and you're not a fan of phone banking or donating, like, Caroline's List may help you get to somebody who could really use your effort and your support in climate policy. So please do everything you can to support Climate Cabinet and the Climate Cabinet Action Fund. And if at all possible, this is something where you can share with your friends, even in California, in DC, in Chicago, anywhere, and they can take action in a way that they can't using other traditional means, like just pure voting. So this is a way we can help. I also want to thank my co-host Mihir, and it always sounds like one of us like isn't doing anything, but they're basically doing everything behind the scenes. So you're a baller. Thank you so much. And then I also want to thank all of the folks here from Clean Energy for Biden. Clean Energy for Biden, I know we've talked about it a little bit, but it's an amazing community, and I feel like one of the cool things about Clean Energy for Biden is that everyone in Clean Energy for Biden is a bit of an energy or an EV or an environmental nerd, and it's amazing. It's basically all my people, and the only people who, as a group, I like more than that are the Sea Life folks who are all on this call. Thank you guys so much. That's the Clean Energy Leadership Institute, y'all. It's amazing. Both Carolyn and I are fellows, and so if you think that's cool, I highly recommend you follow them and learn more about their work and their mission, which is all about grooming clean energy leaders and environmental justice. And I think last but not least, we had a lot of folks who joined. Thank you guys so much for coming. You totally made my day, and I'm really excited to be sharing a lot of this information with you. Please don't hesitate to donate to the Texas 10. Please don't hesitate to go to cleanenergyforbiden.com and sign up. The worst thing that will happen to you is you'll get some emails about really cool events that are happening that are clean energy focused. Oh my gosh, what a terrible thing. It's actually amazing, and all of my favorite events are happening right now because of it. And you know, if you can, just be as involved as possible. Make a plan to vote. Help other people vote. There's 100 ways that you can be involved, and we have to do this in November. It's what, Caroline, did you say we're only like 65 days away? That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's so
67.
67, guys. 67. So with that, get ready for my minute of climate change comedy. And if you don't like it, don't tell me. All right, folks. With the SF heat wave and dry lightning wildfires and 2, not 1, but 2, simultaneous hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico does kind of feel like the case for climate change is really overwhelming. But there's nothing like America for independent free thinkers. We've got about 15% of people in the US who still don't believe that climate change is real or don't believe that humans are causing it. So we're still really leading the pack on that one. Freedom for all in the brain, even if it's freedom to be dumb. However, hopefully we'll make some progress. But 2020 is still like 4 more months there, so you never know. With the year of QAnon and all that other stuff, God knows what could happen. But I try to be sympathetic. I get it. Why would you be so nervous about making all the investments and doing all this work? It makes total sense. Like, I would be a little risk averse too. After all, what if it's all a big hoax and we make a better world from nothing? Can you even imagine? That's it. And if you didn't think it was funny, don't tell me at all. Love you guys. It was so great hanging out. It was a pleasure. Cheers to hang out with you all. And thank you so much for coming to Clean Energy for Biden. We'll have another event in 2 weeks. Be on the lookout for it and come and join us.